Hi, fellow believers in Christ. I just wanted to talk about Gog and Magog, and the sad thing is, I can't really tell you who or what country they are, but I just wanted to give you some information about Gog and Magog, or current events, because a lot of people have believed for a long time that it's definitely Russia and or maybe Turkey or some other nations that are to the north of Israel. The only thing we know for absolute sure is that it's a country north of Israel, because that's what the Bible says, or two countries. It's kind of hard to tell if it's talking about two countries or the prince of a country, but it is someplace north of Israel. In some translations, it says far north, and that's why a lot of people think it's Russia. And in the Western world, most people think it's Russia because Western Christianity believes that Russia is all out evil. But I want to give you some information today to show you that Russia really isn't as evil at this time as Western Christianity claims it is. Now, if Russia gets a new leader, then it could become maybe Gog or Magog. I don't know. But I don't think it would be Gog or Magog under the leadership that it has right now, currently. And there's probably just as much evidence that it could be Turkey as Russia. So, anyway, I'll just talk about it a little bit now. And this whole war with Ukraine brings it up again in a lot of Christian minds. And people are talking about Russia trying to destroy Israel. But I want to give you a little bit of a better perspective. Now, when the Syrian war was going on back in 2016, again, everybody thought that it was going to be World War III and that Russia was evil and Russia was Gog and Magog and all this kind of stuff. And Christian politicians and Christian pastors were saying bad things about Russia back then. And now, again, with the Ukrainian situation, which I don't really think it's a war at this point, I think it's a conflict, not necessarily a war, and you'll see why in a minute. But now, again, the whole argument is coming up again. And interestingly, in reality, with both the Syrian war and the Ukrainian conflict that's going on now, Russia actually is not at fault, at least not the way the Western media claims. Literally, when the Syrian war was going on, ISIS, which is like the nastiest terrorist organization that I know of, they were killing Shiite Muslims in Syria and doing other bad things. The US government was supplying ISIS with training, weapons, tanks, trucks, and probably manpower as well under President Obama. But our media said that Putin was supplying ISIS when actually Putin was fighting ISIS. He just wasn't winning. He had struck ISIS several times, but he wasn't able to completely stop them until President Trump was elected. And then Trump immediately stopped supplying ISIS with money, weapons, and tanks and men. And he started bombing ISIS strategically, and literally within days, they were snuffed out. But Putin had already been fighting ISIS for a long time, basically on his own. But then once the USA stepped in and to get rid of ISIS instead of create it, it was immediately destroyed within days. So, so that's what happened with ISIS. And there was a lot of bad press about Putin back then, but it was all wrong. Now, the same thing, a similar situation is now happening with the Ukraine, where Putin is actually trying to help the Ukrainian people from 8 years of oppression from Nazi paramilitary that have been terrorizing the Ukrainian people for the last 8 years. And that's what he's fighting. So again, he's fighting an evil um, organization of thugs again. And it's the neo Nazi militia in Ukraine. So, anyway, we'll look at this. Here is this lady. Now, yes, this is Russian television, but this is a real lady. And if you watch the whole interview, she doesn't look like a fake actor at all. She doesn't look like a paid actor. And here is a quote of what she's saying. They use us as human shield, our own Ukrainian military. Now, in Western media, they're claiming that Russia is bombing civilians, but it's actually the opposite. And the civilians on the ground are witnessing that it's the opposite, that it's their own military that's bombing them. Here's another interview. Here it is. If you say anything wrong, they shoot you. Here he says it. Here you say an extra word and they kill you. He's not talking about the Russian troops. He's talking about the Ukrainian troops that have been terrorizing his people for years. But this town that he's in, Lugansk, the Russians came and liberated it. So he's out in the open now, speaking his mind because no one's going to shoot him for talking anymore because those troops are gone. Now, Putin keeps calling the people in the paramilitary in Ukraine neo Nazis, and in case you don't believe Putin, this is their flag. That's their flag. That's their flag. This is what they look like. This is their salute. Look at that. Let's see if there's anything else here. But anyhow, that's who he's talking about. These are the people that are terrorizing the Ukrainian people, and that's who he is fighting. He considers Ukraine his own people. He considers them part of Russia or brothers and sisters with Russia. So this isn't really a war against Ukraine. It's a Putin believes it's a liberation of the Ukrainian people against this oppressive paramilitary people that have been terrorizing them for years. Look at this. The U.S. is arming and assisting while neo-Nazis in Ukraine, assisting neo-Nazis in Ukraine while Congress debates prohibition. I don't know what the prohibition part means, but here's a picture of a U.S. military person with a Ukrainian Nazi paramilitary guy, and they're working together. And then here's the somewhat Nazi salute. It's not the same as the traditional Nazi salute. It's a little bit different. But anyway, this article talks about how our military is actually helping the Nazis. Meanwhile, what our Christian news reporters and Christian pastors are calling a war, they're calling it what are they calling it? An information war is what I would call a propaganda campaign. They're actually promoting propaganda. And some of them are doing it out of total ignorance. They have good intentions, but basically they believe what they've been told instead of doing their own research and finding out what's really going on. So they believe that Russia is evil, and therefore they think it's okay to prevent Russian news from getting out to the world because they think that it must be a lie. But actually, the civilians on the ground that the Russians are interviewing are saying the same thing that Putin is saying. Okay, so here's an interesting article, and it explains how the Ukrainian nationalists are also a problem because they will attack their own government if there's any type of deal made with Russia. So that also is domestic terrorism. When people in your country want to attack your own government, is if your government does anything that they don't like. So that's terrorism right there too. And that's similar to what we see in America with what's that one group that terrorized all the cities, that tore all the cities apart? I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, like in Portland, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington, they took over those towns and destroyed everything. That's basically the same thing. If the government does something they don't like, then they destroy, they terrorize the people and try to destroy the local government. Um, so here's another article that shows that Zelensky, who the West is calling this great big suffering hero, he's not a hero at all. He's a clown, literally. He's a comedian. He's an actor. He's a paid actor right now. He's a puppet. Um, he knows nothing about military, nothing about politics, nothing about government. He's just a puppet that was installed, and he's literally acting. And because he knows how to act, I guess. So they thought he would be a great person to install as a puppet because he pretends to be a president. Here he is shaking hands with one of the neo-Nazi paramilitary leaders, saying, "If you help us against Russia, then we're all on the same side." Well, how can you be on the same side with neo-Nazis for any reason? That doesn't make sense. Um, that just doesn't make sense. Who would do that? Who would ask Nazis for help? Who in their right mind would do that? Only an evil person would do that. So this is why Putin doesn't respect Zelensky, and why I don't respect him either. This is interesting. Zelensky got nominated for president. He won in a supposed landslide election, which I don't believe that. I believe that it was rigged because people aren't that stupid. They don't vote for clowns. Even if they like your TV show, that doesn't mean that they're going to think that you would make a good president. Okay, people just aren't that stupid. But to try to make the people stupid, on New Year's Eve in Ukraine, before Zelensky was supposedly elected, they put him on TV replacing the traditional New Year's Eve greeting from the actual president. They put him on TV saying he was going to run for president. And that was kind of an unprecedented thing to do, and it makes no sense unless you're brainwashing the people, which they also did when they had him play the role of president on his TV show before he got elected. That's a form of brainwashing and conditioning. Okay, so like I said in one of the last videos, one of the reasons why I think the secular world hates Putin so much is because he's a wear it on your sleeve, staunch Christian. Now, I'm not saying he's perfect. I don't think he's born again um, by any means, but he he really publicizes the fact that he is Russian Orthodox, and he's not going to stop being Russian Orthodox. Those are his ideals from day one. And even when he runs for office, he always reminds the people, "I'm your Russian Orthodox candidate. That's who you're voting for if you vote for me." So this is his identity. Zelensky is born Jewish. Um, but he's considered Jewish. But he actually doesn't ascribe to any religion. He's a secular person. Zelensky is highly secular. But I'm sure he would use his Jewish, roots for his political benefit if he thought it would benefit him. Um, So here's more about the Russian Orthodox Church. In the early 1900s, they were treated a lot like China treats churches now that aren't state churches. The people got persecuted, their churches were burned down, and all that kind of stuff. So Putin isn't really the communist that a lot of people like to think of him as. He's very non communist for a communist because um, for somebody who supposedly had a communist background, the reality is communism does not tolerate Christianity at all. It hates all religions, but it hates Christianity the most. And um, Putin is all about Christianity. He promotes it actively. Um, and he thinks that a lot of his decision making is based on his faith. Now, I'm not saying that everything he does is right or that he's a perfect person or a holy person, but he actually does things based on what he believes is right. That's why he fought ISIS in the Syrian war, and that's why he's fighting the neo Nazis um, and the Ukrainian nationalists now because they're harming the people in that country. So that's what he believes is right, and that's why he does it. That's why all Christians do things because we think we're doing, or we believe we're doing what is right. That's our motivation. Um, and this is a famous story that if you ever read about Putin, you're always going to read this. That his mother secretly had him baptized in 1952, and I'm assuming that was when he was a baby. Um, but she had to do it in secret because it wasn't legal. But her faith was so strong that she did it anyway. And that's a favorite family memory that they have. It's a favorite family legend of Putin. And apparently it's a true story. And he loves to tell that story because that is really what he's all about. That's what he believes in. He believes in Christianity. I think he's what I would call a nominal Christian. But his faith in God is very, very strong. And he's not going to back down from it. So, talking about the end of times and Magog and Gog and all that stuff, a lot of people, like I say, in the West, they think it has to be Russia. Now, it could be Russia, but it doesn't necessarily have to be Russia. But back in like the 80s and stuff, with Ronald Reagan and then George Bush, um, and the pastors that we had at that time, they just all wanted to say it was Russia because, you know, Reagan said that Russia was something about the great evil or something because of the Soviet Union, but then the Soviet Union fell, and but people have never stopped saying that Russia is really evil. Um, so the area of Gog and Magog, according to the Bible, a lot of scholars think it's this area here. Now, this is part of Russia. It's like on the border of Russia and, sorry, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. So they're all kind of mixed in there. And this is the area that it's talking about. But the Bible could mean Turkey. It could actually mean Turkey. It doesn't, I don't know if it's Russia, Turkey, or both. But I think that if it is Russia, it would be under a different leader than Putin because Putin is not anti Israel like a lot of people claim he is, but there's really no evidence to show that he's anti Israel. No evidence whatsoever. Um, so it could be Russia, but I think it would have to be under different leadership. So if Putin gets ousted and somebody else takes his place, then maybe we'll see what happens. So in the Bible, there Gog and Magog, it's mentioning the sons of Japheth. Now Japheth was one of Noah's sons. He had Shem, Ham, and Japheth. From Shem descended the Israelites. From Ham descended a lot of the people that are in Africa. From Japheth descended a lot of the people that we would call white people today, um, which doesn't describe them very well. But basically, it's people who are lighter skinned. And so out of the lighter skinned people comes Gomer and Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tiras. So these are the areas that are kind of around the Caucasus Mountains in Turkey and the place on the map that I just showed you. Okay. And it is mainly white people. So we can say Gog and Magog are considered white people. Okay. Whatever that means, because white can be anything. Because it's a color, it's not really a race like the government tells you it is. And black is a color too. Black isn't a race either, just so you know. I mean, the government says black is a race, but it really is a color because you can be anything and be black. So, so again, here's some evidence that it could be Turkey. Okay. So Turkey is a Muslim country and it's mostly Sunni Muslim, just so you know. It's 80% Sunni. Out of the Muslims that are there, they're 80% Sunni Muslims. Sunni Muslims are the ones where most Muslim terrorist organizations come from. So Shiite is the other kind of Muslim. Shiites basically do hate Israel, but they don't hate the rest of the world. Sunnis hate the whole world. They want everybody dead, including the Israelites, including the Christians. They want to kill everybody who's not one of them. And the Sunnis also like to kill the Shiites. Long story short, I won't get into that. But the Sunnis are against Israel. They're against the Jews. They're against the Shiites, and they're against Christians, and they're against basically the whole world in general. So there's pretty much nobody that the Sunnis don't fight against. Most terrorist organizations are Sunni, including Boko Haram and ISIS. They're Sunni. There's only one terrorist organization I know of that's Shiite, and I can't remember the name of it, but it starts with an H. It might be Hezbollah, but I'm not positive that that's its name. But it's a name that starts with an H. I think it might be Hezbollah, but they're the only ones. They're the only terrorist organization that's Shiite. The rest of them are all Sunni, just so you know. But this one, again, more evidence that it's probably not Russia that's Gog and Magog. For one thing, Turkey is in that same region that the Bible is talking about. Turkey hates Israel on the record, and Russia doesn't on the record. Turkey has more terrorist organizations. They have their, they're connected to a lot of terrorist organizations. And here's another final thing. Look at this. Israel blocked arms to Kiev. Now, why would Israel do that right before the conflict started? Well, I think they did it because they're more concerned about Ukraine than they are about Russia, which is more evidence that Russia isn't Gog or Magog, at least not at this point, not with Putin as leader. I don't think it's them. Now, again, maybe if he gets overthrown and somebody else takes his place, then maybe it will become Russia. But right now, Ukraine is full of neo-Nazis, right? They're full of people who hate the Jews. Russia really isn't percentage-wise. And its government isn't against Israel. Its leader isn't against Israel. If anything, Russia is doing Israel a favor right now by fighting these neo-Nazis. And in fact, they're doing the whole world a favor. And first and foremost, they're doing the people of Ukraine a favor. Yeah, Russia is actually doing the right thing in this conflict. They are liberating the Ukrainian people just like they claimed. And just like in Syria, they said they were liberating the Syrian people, just like they claimed. And yes, indeed they were. And Trump agreed with them on that. And Trump did the right thing and um, basically won the war for them and for all of us. He won the Syrian war. So anyway, the reason that I used to hate Donald Trump until he started running for president. And one day I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to see what this clown says. So I listened to one of his debates, and that was when I started to really like Donald Trump because he was the only candidate out of all of them, including the independents, the Republicans, everybody. He was the one and only candidate on the debate panels that told the truth about Syria, that Russia wasn't the bad guy. It was actually the US that had started the Syrian war, and it was the US that was supplying ISIS. He was the only one who told the truth, and that was when I first started to like Trump. And anyway, we would have gone to war with Russia if Hillary had been elected, and Hillary and Obama both were provoking war with Russia through that Syrian war. Um, and now you see the same thing happening. The Western world is provoking war with Russia through the Ukrainian conflict. The whole world is saying that it's all Russia's fault when actually Russia is helping the Ukrainian people, which they consider their own. Um, so again, it's another provocation for World War III. Maybe it'll end up being World War III. I don't know. But that's what the Western world wants. They want World War III, the secular people who control all these puppet governments, including our own. So just so you know, nobody really knows who Gog and Magog is, but I really don't think at this particular point that it's Russia. And I do think that the Western nations want World War III and they want it now. Now, why is it so handy for us to blame Russia for the gas prices? Russia has nothing to do with our gas prices. It's our own government that's refusing to let us tap into our own oil. Once we start tapping into our own oil resources, our gas prices will plummet. Because that's what was happening when Trump was president, and that's why gas got really low when Trump was president, because he wasn't buying gas from anyone. We don't need gas from Russia. But now they're saying that they won't buy gas from Russia on principle, and that's the reason the gas prices are high. The reason the gas prices are high is because they won't let us tap into our own reserves. So that's a handy lie. And then another thing that I mentioned in the last video, but I'll mention it again, is Russia doesn't want Ukraine to have a NATO vote. And as you all know, NATO is a very evil organization. NATO hates everybody and always tries to provoke wars and cause people to get hurt and terrorize. So NATO has never made any decision that was good for the world ever in its whole history. And Russia doesn't want NATO to have another vote through the Ukraine, but Zelensky does because Zelensky is a liberal, and he loves NATO, even though everything they do is wrong. And Trump also hated NATO. If he were president today, I know that he would not want Ukraine to have a NATO vote either. So the funny thing is, when Trump was running for president, the Democrats realized that Trump wouldn't tell any lies about Russia. So they said that he was a Russia lover and a Putin lover and all this kind of stuff. And the reality was he just wasn't willing to tell lies about Russia. That's all it was. And I'm not willing to believe any lies about Russia. I know it's not a perfect country. I know Putin isn't perfect. but the stuff that's coming out in the media is so false, it's comical. And it's so far from the truth, it's painful to listen to. Um, anyway, so just wanted to share that with you. And the sad part of this presentation today is that I really can't tell you who Gog and Magog is. That's the sad part, is I don't have a hard, concrete answer. Anyway, hope you're blessed, and I just don't want you to be brainwashed um, by the media and by what even Christians are saying right now. Just don't be brainwashed. Listen to the Holy Spirit. If you want to do your own research, do your own research, but you don't have to. Just listen to the Holy Spirit. He'll tell you what you need to know. Don't get your information from the local news. That's not going to help you out any. Okay, God bless you.